Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And we start today with a song you're certain to enjoy.
I dreamed a dream, like every young girl has, that I was certain would come true one day, of stardom and success and all that jazz, so I could pay the bills I'd have to pay. But that isn't quite the way things are. No auditions yet worked out for me. I still long to be a superstar and dream of how I'd love my life to be. I wish that my life were like a musical, that I could go waltzing through in style. With each song and dance I'd be less miserable. With each sound of music I'd smile. The good would make good, the bad would get their due, and steam trains would race, and pussies wouldn't poo, and foreigners always would speak English too. For once I'd not fear the routine. My life would be fit for a queen. I wish that my life were like a Broadway show, for then I would always know the score, and I could predict how it was sure to go. If I'd seen the movie before, I'd be as attractive as a girl could be, and recognize bad guys by their minor key. With enemies I'd still be in harmony, and anything urgent would wait till after a big middle eight. I could cast spells, tyrants would adore me, ghosts would write operas for me. I'd get through songs not fearing ever hearing "We'll let you know," with still a verse to go. Like a West End hit, where others had thoughts the same as mine, and all that I said need not make sense one bit, as long as it just about rhymed. The guys would show feelings that they used to hide. I'd still want to sing with corpses by my side. Well, I'd even sing if I myself had died. I'd live without scruples or shame, and say that the writer's to blame. But then, if my life were like a musical, I might be orphaned, treated mean, or trampled on by wildebeests, or sold to be a slave, or green. I might be killed by my own twin, or made into a pie mid-show, or fed to plants, or crucified, or made to sing with Russell Crowe. I might, I know, but even so, I wish that my life were like a musical, where I felt at home in every key. I'd not have to trek to any place at all. Projections would just come to me. I'd get sentimental without cause to fear that boyfriends will puke at every word they hear. My voice would be pleasing to a phantom's ear. I wish that my life were this way, for then if my life were like a musical, I know there would be a whole show about
Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, brother of the anagrammatical Fred Inge, which I don't think it takes a genius to spot is the Ed Fringe, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, the world's largest arts festival, which takes place every year in Edinburgh. And if you're a fan of musical theatre, and if you're not, why are you listening? But if you are a fan of musical theatre, it's the place to be in August. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe every year has a large number of musicals, cabarets, and even pantomimes. So there's always plenty to enjoy if you like our kind of music. And the Fringe, of course, is an enormous hodgepodge of pretty much everything. Some shows are astounding, some shows are terrible, some are conventional, some are experimental, some abstract, some symbolic, some hugely professional, and some utterly amateur. And yet, this enormous melee of wonder all adds up to something magnificent. So when I shout, "Behave, frightful ingredients," those of you with anagrammatical minds will immediately spot that is indeed an anagram of Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And whilst we're playing that game, an anagram of Edinburgh Fringe is "Bring Huge Friend." And that's exactly what I did this year. I was at the Fringe with some of my biggest Musical Talk friends. Michael Gordon-Shapiro, Colin Malloy and David Kingsmill, to name but three. And they're all people you'll be hearing from in future episodes of Musical Talk. But what are we going to get today? Well, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is in full swing, even as we record this episode. It runs through to the 26th of August, so you still have time to go and see some shows. And that's what this episode, therefore, is going to be all about. We have picked some of the songs and some extracts from interviews which I conducted in Edinburgh this year to create a collage of some of the most exciting or interesting or intriguing pieces of musical theatre that you can see. And all the shows mentioned today are still on and will be running for a week or so more. Remember, all details can be found on the Ed Fringe website. It's a one-stop shop for all your Edinburgh Festival Fringe show needs and worth a browse even if you're not going. But we've got a lot to get through today and a lot of shows to showcase. We've started with one already. You heard the wonderful song "I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical," which is incidentally the title song of a cabaret revue by the very talented Alexander S. Bermange, and we'll be hearing from him later in the programme, because he was behind a very wonderful show called "I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical." And if your ears were positioned near your wits and were about you, you'll have picked up lots of musical theatre references in the song, both musically and lyrically. More details on that show later in the programme. But what now? Well, I think we'll start the episode proper with 3 extracts back to back. In a minute, we'll hear the title song from Joel Goodman's Early Mornings, the musical. After that, a short extract of my interview with Rebecca Perry and our old friend David Kingsmill about Rebecca's show From Judy to Betty, the Stars of Old Hollywood. And then after that, a short extract with Georgie Botham and Joe Davis talking about their musical, How to Use a Washing Machine, and in particular their decision to use a string quartet as their orchestra. An interesting choice and a very successful one. So, let's start this little sequence with Early Mornings.
Shut up, damn thing!
The sound of an alarm clock. The brutal awakening to a day that can hopefully only get better. Most of the time, the sound means only one thing. Here we go again.
You can feel your blood pressure rising at the mere sound of this hellish device.
Oh, stop, damn thing!
The date is September the 1st, and our thespian here has just returned from his annual trip to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Each year I go to the Fringe and tell myself that I shall write a show for next year, and I never do. Well, this time it's going to be different. I will write a show for next year. If I start getting up early each morning, then I will have the time I need to actually get this done. It's a new day.
It's a new day, must get up.
But it's far too early. To sleep.
Must get up. It's time to wake
I want to sleep.
It's time to wake up.
It's a new project, a new life goal, to see what can be achieved. All I need is time.
Rise up.
If I just stick to this new routine, the sky's the limit. Start to work harder than I did before.
Rise up.
Starting today,
Starting now.
I shall make change. Get up now. Early mornings, how hard can they be?
1 extra hour.
Life's frantic nature steals opportunity.
Soon the routine will leave you for dead.
Once in a while, you have to be true to
who you are.
early mornings are the answer. 1 extra hour each day that I can use to focus on achieving something new and exciting. I've always wanted to write a musical. I shall get up early each day and write for 1 hour, starting now. It's a new project, a new life goal, to see what can be achieved. All I need is time.
Rise up.
If I just stick to this new routine, the sky's the limit. Start to work harder than I did before.
Rise up.
Starting today,
Starting
I shall make change. Get up now. There's a million reasons to underachieve in life.
You fail.
Haven't got the time or the money or the brains.
Fail.
Just pick the excuse that you will use. Makes you dizzy. Spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. So dizzy. Spinning at 1,000 miles per hour.
Need more
Time. Calm down. Must calm down. I need to come up with a plan. Wake up early every day.
2,
Write a show about how you can achieve all your goals.
3,
Cast it.
4.
Take the show to Edinburgh Fringe. Get rich.
Dream on.
Famous.
Dream on.
Transfer to the West. And
Dream
I'll
on.
buy a big yacht and a fast car. Book 5 holidays in a year.
Are you done?
Okay, I'm being ridiculous. The point is, no matter what I write, no matter how terrible, I shall take it to the Fringe to fulfill a lifelong goal of writing a show. Starting today,
Starting
I shall make change. Get up now.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Perry, and my show is called From Judy to Betty, the Stars of Old Hollywood, happening at the Edinburgh Fringe, 7:30 every day.
And I'm David Kingsmill, and I am the musician for said show, and an old haunt of this podcast.
I was going to say David Kingsmill of this parish. I
Indeed.
think would be
Yeah.
the way I would describe it. It's lovely to see you back in the country. Rebecca, I know you've been here on plenty of occasions and you've sold out Edinburgh as well.
Yeah.
So I know the two of you have had, historically, tremendous Edinburgh success each. But the show we're talking about today, From Judy to Betty, it's already been burnished across the world, I think that's the best way of saying. So tell us a little bit about the show and how it came to be.
Absolutely. So it was initially commissioned in Toronto, Canada, as a half-an-hour piece for a festival called the Next Stage Theatre Festival, where basically across Canada, 10 pieces are chosen and curated in one theatrical building. So I was given the cabaret space, so I only had a hot 30 minutes to make something happen. And of course, I found out I was accepted while I was still at the 2015 Edinburgh Fringe Festival, still performing Confessions of a Red-Headed Coffee Shop Girl. So of course, I had lots of inspiration around me, and I was just sort of thinking, what do I want to write a show about next? And of course, I thought all of the women that I grew up admiring, because my grandmother was my babysitter, so of course I admired all the wonderful women from the movie musical era that is I guess now a bygone era, an era of yesteryear.
We're really talking the great 30s musicals.
We are.
And a little bit beyond.
The golden age and up.
Yes.
So basically...
to the tarnished age where we are now.
Exactly. So this half an hour iteration happened. David was actually the dramaturge, one of two, for this half an hour iteration. And then, of course, we got so much interest in it that we expanded it to both a 60-minute version and a 90-minute version with an intermission for the sake of touring. Because in Canada, different theatres want different things.
Well, it's useful that you can put it in different formats because that makes it madly versatile.
Absolutely. And we find it just gives people options, and it makes them sort of see it as like less of a solo show and more of like a polished piece. But yeah, since then, oh my goodness, it's been around the world 3 times, I think. We've done 2 tours in the east coast of Canada, around Ontario, 2 tours in the UK, all around a bunch of rural theatres that have been lovely. And here we are. And already there's stuff coming down the pipeline.
Yep.
Nothing signed in blood, but, hello, Australia, Hong Kong, what's up?
There is a future to be had.
There's a future to be had.
But let's go back to that first half-hour iteration, because the conceit of the show, certainly the Edinburgh version, is that you are remembering and paying tribute to and performing the works of and the careers of, that's a muddled sentence, but you get my drift, of 4 of the great film actresses who appeared principally in musicals, although not exclusively. And let's name them.
Yeah, absolutely. The legends of yesteryear are Bette Davis, Judy Garland, Lucille Ball, and the lesser known but still very lovely Betty Hutton.
But in that first half-hour version, were you able to get all 4 in? Were there all 4 women in there, or was it their songs? I mean, how did that half-hour show start?
I was able to fit all 4 women in, but dare I say, it was even more of a breakneck pace than it currently is.
It's got good pace now, yes.
That
is to its advantage.
Absolutely, it's got flow now, whereas before it was like...
I don't know her.
Throwing ideas at people. And I think now it has room to breathe.
Yeah, it was a little bit more of a rushed affair. Each of the ladies had maybe 2.5 songs, where now they're able to sit comfortably in 4 with additional spoken material that wasn't there previously. It's a bit more wholesome, it's a bit more informative, and it has more of an arc from beginning to end, rather than what was simply by dint of time requirement, more of a zigzag previously that just kind of got there rapidly, coherently, but maybe not with as much panache and finesse that it's got now.
Well, I'd say Elan, but they will.
I would also say that the message of sort of these 4 women found Hollywood and they left it in better shape than when they found it is much more of a thing that can land in the 60 and 90 minute version, because you can really take a second to say, like, well, here's what they did that was different from everybody else.
They are groundbreakers, aren't they? All 4 of them.
Absolutely.
But also you have ordered the 4-star version in its slightly more breathing sense, in a very organic way, in the sense that, it's right that you start with Bette Davis because she's there at the forefront, and then it does slip seamlessly into Judy Garland because there are connections, and Judy Garland obviously into Betty Hutton because many of us know that the Annie Get Your Gun story, where Betty Hutton replaced Judy Garland. And then, of course, from Betty Hutton, you can definitely see the beginnings of sort of a zany, well, not beginnings, but
like a comedic
an exemplar, yeah, exactly, which takes us into Lucille Ball. And as you quite rightly point out, and you throw it away, quite rightly, you don't over-egg it. Lucille Ball owned her own television studio.
I know.
Desilu.
Yeah, Desilu Studios.
And indeed, I think they're connected with Star Trek in that sense.
They are.
So,
That's in the 90-minute version.
Yeah.
We couldn't quite cram it into the 60, but yeah, she's basically responsible for that going ahead in the first place.
Well, that's done well. Musical talk. I want to come on to the psychology of the characters in a minute, but at the moment I still want to stay with the music, if I may. Did you always envisage it as a string quartet?
From the beginning, actually, yeah.
And that's an interesting choice in itself. Why? And don't just say because I play the cello.
Well, partially because of that, because I've played lots of different kinds of string quartets, and I'm always amazed at the range of sounds you can get with 4 quite similar instruments. They can do so much. They can pizzicato, they can hit the strings, they can bow, they can play legato, staccato, whatever.
Well, can I just briefly interrupt and say, in the Washing Machine song itself, you do 2 fantastically, what might be called non-musical, but of course they are musical things. You portray a cat and you portray a washing machine going wrong with your cello.
Yeah.
I think you've proven to me that your versatility and the versatility of the instrument is very impressive.
Yeah. And I just thought there's a lot of musicals which do use strings, not quite a string quartet, but they use strings, and they use the strings in actually a very simple way. It's just maybe to sustain chords, or
sometimes it's just a bed of lushness as well, which is all very well, but it just
Yeah.
It feels like a bed, and we all fall asleep.
And I just thought...
this isn't that at all.
Yeah, and I just thought maybe if we just take away everything else and we just have strings, no piano, no percussion, no guitar, let's not make it easy for ourselves and have the string quartet and just experiment with what they could do. It could be a really interesting start for a score. So that was the beginning of it, really, actually, very early on.
How would you describe your score? Or how would you both describe your score?
You can answer first. I'm not a musician.
I've tried to make it as eclectic as possible. I've actually mostly tried to use styles which string quartets don't normally play, actually. So, like Calculated Cliché has what you might describe as a bass rock. So whether you embody that with kind of house music, but then also the music of Arturo Piazzolla, who was a South American tango composer.
Thank you for the explanation, because I was lost.
Who created these hugely exciting and unique tangos. So I use that in How to Use a Washing Machine. That's effectively a tango. So I just use those styles and use styles which the string quartet don't really get to play, and I just thought, what if we put those together, what will happen?
Well, there's a real sense of vibrancy, I think, from the orchestra.
Definitely.
And that, I think, keeps an audience on its toes as well. I think it's one of the very essential ingredients of the success of the show. I'm fascinated by the characters. I'm fascinated by the music that the characters are using to express themselves, because what it isn't is obvious. And it's that, when I say failure to be obviousness, which is the great success, and what a sense that is, but it is that, I think, you're right, you could have done it in a way that we might have expected, or a bit more traditional musical, but actually the very fact is complicated and intriguing, and I think as an audience you have to sort of make at least some effort to engage, and I think that's always to be encouraged. You can't just lie back and let the music or the piece come upon you. You have to sort of, you definitely have to engage with it, and that, I think, is clear the moment the first piece of music starts. Was there anything that you therefore missed, that you, having made your decision, like having laid in your bed, as it were, did you then think, oh no, I really want a saxophone in the middle of this one? Or,
I think...
where's my glockenspiel?
Yeah, I think there were times when I missed percussive instruments. Not necessarily a full array, but there were times when I just thought, could we just have a bit more rhythm? Could we just have a bit more, percussive sounds? But then I just thought, well, actually, strings can do that in their own special way. I mean, pizzicato is really a percussive effect. There's hitting the strings at points. They can be percussive instruments as well. So I thought, let's just replace that with the strings.
Is it William Balker who bashes the side of his piano when he's playing?
Yeah.
Well, you're right. You can make rhythm out of a lot of things that you wouldn't expect. Yeah. Absolutely. I think I think the score is very impressive, and I do like the differences in the song. So it's also nicely different throughout. It's not, I've got this now. This is whatever it is, because it isn't. The next song is different again. The next song is different again, and the most essential thing, it underscores or underplays or helps bed and move on the emotional moments of the play. So how did you come to the point where you knew songs had to be? How did you find between you your nexus points?
That's a good question. I think we quite early on laid down the structure of the show, because I am very interested in the way that time relates to shows. I think that's partially visible through the references to the parents and to the two roads and that kind of thing. So I really wanted to get the structure laid out first. So we kind of sat down and we went, right, so we'll have a duet here, we'll have a solo song here. And it did change. But I think because we had that really strong starting point, it meant that we weren't kind of floundering. I felt like we were quite secure from the offset, which was really nice.
Musical talk. Well, there we are. That was Joe Davis and Georgie Botham talking about how to use a washing machine. And if you want to see that, you can. It's running until the 26th of August at Zoo Southside at noon, every day except the 14th and the 21st. I gave that show 4 stars and called it a wonderful gem. And before that, we heard an interview with Rebecca Perry and David Kingsmill about From Judy to Betty, the stars of old Hollywood. You can see that every day until the 26th of August at the Gilded Balloon Patterhouse in Chamber Street, except on the 14th and the 21st of August. And that was a 5-star show. To me, it was clear that Rebecca was a bona fide star, giving a powerhouse performance. Well worth seeing. And before that, we heard a song from Joel Goodman called Early Mornings, from his musical, Early Mornings, the Musical. and that's running to the 24th of August, with the exception of the 18th. And if you want to see that show, you can. It's on at 11:50 in the morning at St Augustine's in the Vault. Now, long-term listeners of Musical Talk, and in particular our coverage of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe every year, will be aware that Edinburgh is just not Edinburgh without a Lawrence Owen show. He's the man behind Cinemusicals, Cinemusicals High, and The Time Machine, all of which were so well received in previous years. Well, he's back again this year with Lindsay Sharman, his wife and fellow performer, for a wonderful show, possibly their best yet, called Jekyll vs. Hyde. And if you're looking for it online, Versus is spelt VS. And it's a very clever show and very funny show about two competing ways of putting on a musical version of Jekyll and Hyde. One very serious, one very full-on, funny, but perhaps a little bold and coarse. An odd duality which of course you might spot reflects the duality of Jekyll and Hyde themselves. Well, let's investigate that a little further. We're now going to hear a wonderful song from the show, and you'll very quickly spot it's a song from the livelier, coarser side. And after that, a short extract of my conversation with Lawrence and Lindsay about Jekyll versus Hyde.
Picture the scene. The staff room of St. Bart's High School somewhere in America. Dr. Jekyll, head of chemistry, chats to his pals, gym teacher Mr. Uddison, and substitute physics teacher Victor Frankenstein.
Hey dudes, what's up? It's everyone's favorite chemistry teacher, Dr. Jekyll.
J-Man, bro, where you been? Checking out the cheerleaders at practice?
Whoa.
High five!
High five! That's your trick, you old dog. I've only got eyes for one little lady, Juicy Lucy Lanyon.
Oh yeah, you had a date with Dr. Lanyon last night. How did it go?
Oh, hey, Victor. Oh, what's that smell? Did you fart?
No, you splashed me with sulfur as a joke, remember?
Oh yeah, haha, that was pretty funny. Anyway, let me tell you about my date. Went to the Science Museum with my special lady. It's intellectual. They got a special exhibit on how you make babies. It's also sexual. I could tell by the sweat on her face that her heart was starting to race.
Whoa, 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 what next? J-Man, you're such a tease. Did she let you touch her biologies?
A gentleman never tells.
Oh, come on.
But a scientist explains.
Yeah!
Let me tell you a little thing about the laws of attraction. The human brain is especially reliant on odors to make connections. So I occasionally wafted my manly aromas in her direction. I could tell she was feeling the heat by the way she was grinding her teeth.
Whoa, 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 what next? You're teasing our pricksicles. When's your story gonna get physical?
I knew she was infatuated, 'cause when I spoke, her pupils dilated. And that's what happens when a lady feels arousal.
Or panic!
And hers were gigantic.
Whoa, 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 what's next? Did you do a chemistry? Did you zap her body with electricity?
Ugh, no, Victor. You don't even go here.
Oh, nobody likes the substitute teacher.
Oh, it's Lucy. Hey, Lucy. Ready for our big second date tonight? What do you mean a rain check? But I thought you liked... Hello? Hello? She broke up with me.
Oh, that's too bad.
Shut up, Victor. I can't believe this. Why do nice guys never get the girls?
Girls like bad boys, maybe you're kind of a square.
Shut up, Victor. Oh, maybe you're right. God, girls are so shallow. I try so hard to be nice and no one appreciates it. I bet if she knew I had a dark side, she'd really like me. You want a bad boy, Lanyon? I'll show you a bad boy. I'll figure out a way to unleash the monster inside. Then she'll go out with me, 'cause I'm bad. Who's bad? That That's me. You got it. Ooh, I'm bad. Who's bad? I'm really bad. Yeah, I'm really, really bad. Fucking hell.
My name's Lawrence Owen. I'm the composer and performer and co-creator of Jekyll vs. Hyde.
And I'm Lindsay, and I suppose I wrote the book. That's the proper terminology.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And that's it.
Well, you are also the performer.
Yeah, I also perform in it.
You have
Sorry.
a significant role.
Yes.
Or
Sorry.
several.
You've somehow edited that out of your head.
Yeah, because I got distracted by a jug of water. I'm very easily distracted.
So that's Lawrence Owen and Lindsay Sharman. So
Yes.
people can find you online. That's the also
Yeah.
important thing. Now, we're talking about Jekyll vs. Hyde, which is your latest Edinburgh show. Although it's not a sequel, it is, if you like, the successor show to your fantastic Time Machine of a couple of years ago. It's fantastic, it is great, but it has that much, if I may say, I think it has an extra level of sophistication that your previous shows perhaps didn't.
Oh, good.
Oh,
I
wow.
thought you were going to say, but
no,
it
it's
was
a
a
good-
little bit
No,
stupid.
it's an enormous bit stupid, but it's lovely. But
In the
it's
best
also
possible.
incredibly clever. It's that wonderful mixture of being absurd and intricate and clever. Because you could, at one level, read it, and I did, as a gloss on the theory of duality, which of course is at the very core of Jekyll and Hyde. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Tell me, how did we get to where we are today? How did Jekyll and Hyde appear in your lives?
Yeah.
Well,
And were you the parents or the godparents?
Well, I was actually, I do a bit of one-on-one tutoring, and I was actually teaching it. And I was also looking for something that was short enough to adapt for the Edinburgh Fringe, because obviously an hour can't be too long, can't do War and Peace or anything. Although we could, maybe we could.
Maybe we should.
Maybe that's next time.
Yeah.
War but no peace.
Yeah, exactly what you said. Actually, the duality thing hit me as a nice thing for a husband and wife team to explore throughout through the story itself.
Yeah, and in fact, interestingly, I didn't quite sort of envisage the show properly until you sort of did a synopsis for me.
Yeah.
You wrote out a kind of breakdown of it after we'd been discussing it for ages, and then suddenly the whole concept all just sort of clicked in my head at once, and I went, oh, I see. It's like two different shows happening at the same time, and they're fighting between each other, and like that being a parallel of the story itself.
Yeah, and a parallel also represents who the characters themselves are as well. So Strange Case is the embodiment of the character Lawrence, and Heidi Ho is the embodiment of the character Lindsay.
Yeah.
Yeah, were there any? Oh yes, and also I wanted to talk about the idea of sort of schlock rock or popular musicals versus a sort of more a serious theatre with songs.
Yes.
Chamber musicals.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Briefly then, because we've alluded to it, do one or both of you, this will be interesting, perhaps want to briefly explain what the show is, what we've just seen? I mean, I think you've touched on it there, but...
It's essentially two performers at the same time attempting to perform very different musical versions of the story of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, the serious one, although the serious one has elements of ludicrousness as well. So the show starts with the serious one, and then the chaotic element, which is the stagehand, introduces the other musical and sort of so derails this serious musical.
Yeah, and it's a constant back and forth, and we keep switching between the two different shows, the very, very serious chamber musical, if you like, a kind of Sondheim-esque, very high art, high theatre one.
With sock puppets.
With sock puppets.
Sock puppets, but Gilbertian patter. Now that's a
Yeah.
great combo, that.
I suspected you would probably touch on the influence on that song.
I can't help it, but watching non-articulate socks singing an articulate song is very interesting.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, we didn't want either musical to be too good, as it were, which is why we introduced the sock puppets for the first thing, didn't we? Because we didn't want people to be like, oh, I was really getting into that excellent serious musical.
Yeah.
And you know, to be annoyed at the Lindsay character for interrupting it. So introducing sock puppets is kind of going to the audience, this is a bit crap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's hope something stops
We
it.
hope it's almost like a signpost to saying people, don't worry, it's not just this for an hour.
Well, I think that happens the moment that the black cloth behind which you're performing, Lawrence, when you're doing the sock puppets, is placed over your head because Lindsay's off doing something else, I think, preparing tea as a bit part.
Yeah.
Before we get on to the duality, which I think is going to be the substance of that conversation, I would just like to say I love the way you feed, because it's a great novel, and I've had the privilege of reading it, because I once also adapted it for pantomime. So
did you?
Yes, I feel your pain and your love.
This.
Oh.
I wouldn't possibly comment, but yours is infinitely better, I should say. But I like the fact that you, without over-egging it, you also pick up on the flaws, if I may be able to say that, in Stevenson's novel, because it has it's always had the weakness of not really having any female characters worth mentioning, and no one stays around for more than a page.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I remember it was evil housekeeper, referenced child, and histrionic maid who spots the murder of Sir Danvers Carew from a window.
That's right.
Basically, the police say, "Well, but you're a histrionic maid." Yes,
Yeah.
I am, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I won't be listening to anything you say. Be upon your business.
Yeah, that's typical in novels of that era, though, isn't it? Everything is reported.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to see any actual exciting things happening. You can only hear people going, "Goodness me, something rather unpleasant has happened."
And it's all men in drawing rooms, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I love the fact you reference that. You know, you do say so much of this is reported. The mystery element, of course, is no longer relevant after X number of years. And then there are other sort of beautiful references just fed in, because the, if you like, the meta story of the relationship between the two of you as husband and wife performers on the stage goes through its ups and downs through the piece. And you even reference the fact that you had written Strange Case to be the antidote to Heidi Ho. And the word antidote, of course, is not an unweighted word in the world of Jekyll and Hyde. So there are all these lovely little golden threads, I think. I think that's why it's one of the reasons it's such a beautiful tapestry.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on all of that.
Musical talk. And what rating did I give Jekyll and Hyde? I gave it 5 stars. Clever, absurd and simply brilliant. Lawrence Owen and Lindsay Sharman, who are both incredibly talented people who know how to put on a marvellous show, who know how to put on a clever show, and know how to put on a funny show. They've done all three in this wonderful piece, Jekyll versus Hyde. And if you want to go and see it, please do. It's on at the Voodoo Rooms, literally 2 minutes from North Bridge, until the 25th of August at 3:25 in the afternoon. That's a free show, but just be aware, the etiquette in Edinburgh for free shows is usually, if you feel you can, to make a donation of £5 or more in the bucket afterwards. And that's true of all free shows at the Fringe. We'll be hearing more from that score and that full interview in a future episode of Musical Talk. And when you've heard more than one of the songs, you'll see how cleverly Lawrence and Lindsay have been able to leap from small, delicate, thoughtful chamber musical to broad, brash, commercial vulgarity. Well, another staple of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe every year is the Royal Scottish Conservatoire, and they've done what they usually do, which is to put on a fantastic, well-known show, in this case Legally Blonde, and of course they've commissioned 2 new pieces of writing, which are thematically linked. One is called Limbo, City of Dreams, by our old friend Finn Anderson, and the other is called Limbo, The 12, by Jonathan Bowerfield and Casey Kendall. Well, Finn, Casey and Jonathan were also responsible for last year's 2 theme shows, commissioned by the Conservatoire, and so in a minute we're going to hear an interview that I conducted with Casey and Jonathan about the 12, but first let's hear a song from their very excellent show from last year, The Book of Names. And this song's called If This Is It.
If this is it, if this is it, I don't know what I'll do when you won't be. So if this is it,
if this is it, and it might be it, you'll keep him safe and warm, and the wood stove lit. Every meal that we prepare, every kiss that we have shared, that can be enough for me if it must. Everything we've had is more than what I dared to dream before. If that's all, I'll gladly fall to dust smile through the tears.
If this is it,
I'll be happy with our years, and I'll try not to think of what could have been, 'cause this is it.
You're gonna marry this man and you don't love him?
What else am I supposed to do?
Come with me.
How? How could I come with you?
Because you don't love him, you love me.
I do not, Finn. I do not love you.
Okay, I just thought...
If I loved you, if, mind you, because I don't.
Yeah, it sounds like you might.
If I did have the smallest, tiniest bit of affection for you, which I am not admitting to, then that's a problem, Finn, isn't it?
Take a chance and tell me you're in love. Take my hand, just tell me you're in love. I don't know much about anything, but if I may, this might be love. Close your eyes and whisper you're in love.
People will talk.
Yeah, they'll say if you're wise, you'll kiss her. You're in love.
You're in love.
Of course I am. I would do anything, everything, just to hear you say that this might be love. Every meal we might prepare, every kiss that we could share, that all seems like love to me. Yes, it must. Everything we'll have is more than what I dare to dream before. If that's all, I'll gladly fall to dust, to dust. Take a chance and tell me. I'll smile through. Take my hand, just tell me you're in love. I'll be happy with our years. I don't know what I'll do when you won't be. I don't know much about anything, but I know this is it.
Let's talk briefly about our protagonist, Tess. She's actually got quite a lot of agency, although she's obviously an addict. Let us always remember that addiction isn't go straight in and become straight out of Trainspotting. There are stages of development, and you can see that she's been in rehab several times, so we know that it's been a yo-yo for her in so many ways. And yet, as each layer is peeled off, we do see that actually that underneath there is this good heart, this humanity. And she is still trying, in some senses, even when she's fighting her own addiction successfully. But she is still trying at some stages to. There are the glimmers of who she was and the glimmer of who she still is underneath coming through, which I found quite interesting. But as an audience, it's quite subverting. I mean, as you said, it's so easy to judge. Sorry.
No.
Backing on again.
No, well, it's an interesting point. It's always interesting to hear what someone who's not familiar with our process up to this point gets out of the show. Early on, we were like, this is a show about the opioid epidemic, but really it's a show about our characters, and we can explore the opioid epidemic and the kind of biases everyone sort of enters through that character, and that's all fine. But we were very careful early on to make sure that this wasn't going to be the same sort of addiction story that it exists in media already. Like we didn't want it to be a redundant thing, but instead explore a new side of it. And so we wanted to show scenes and sides of a character deeply addicted to a dangerous substance that you don't see in other things. And so we never once show anyone actually doing drugs, because that's not really what's important to us. It's everything that's in the cracks, and the things in the cracks are the most interesting. Yeah, sure. You can't escape some of this terminology. It's been a nightmare to rehearse this thing without making just the worst jokes in the world.
Well, allow me to step in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been it's also been really great working with writing. Even though we work together, can be a bit of an isolating process because we're just sitting in the room alone.
You sit in a room together?
We do,
Sometimes,
we do try to be in the same room. It goes much better that way. I always have a moment. I'm talking to our friends about this. I always have a moment in every song where I lie face down on the ground and say nothing, because it's just part of the process. Because sometimes this is going off on a bit of a tangent, but sometimes when I'm playing the piano, my hands will do things that my brain doesn't want it to do.
Muscle memory, or?
Yeah, basically, I'm a jazz player as well, and I've been playing since I was 4 years old. So there are certain patterns that I'm used to doing. So if I'm writing at the piano, I'll do things that are familiar and things that I don't want to do. So my solution to that is to lie face down on the floor and think about the music instead of playing it.
There's a horror film in there somewhere, by the way. Independent Hands.
Yeah. All that aside, when we actually got into the room and sat with our 15 cast members, what's great about this show is that everybody's on stage the whole time.
Yeah.
And there's always a reason for them to be on stage.
And there's always a reason for them to be on stage, so they can interact with each other in character and bring out parts of their character that we didn't know were there. So when we got to the rehearsal room and people started interacting with each other and forming these relationships that aren't necessarily on the page but are there when you dig deeper, it was really great to kind of see what all of our actors brought to the show that we couldn't while I was lying face down on the ground in my room.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually quite an impediment to see a show when you're lying face down.
It's true, yeah,
but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, where next for this show? Because obviously you're playing here in Edinburgh, and for the whole run, I think.
To the 24th, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty much bank holiday, I think, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah.
But it's alternate days, so people should check to see us at 3 o'clock at the Thos,
Thos,
which is the old C venue for people who are still living in last year.
Yeah.
The one in Chambers Street, anyway. So check availability for both shows. But when the Fringe is finished, where is it going next, or what could it be doing?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things about the Fringe is the time slots, and I think shows that are written intended to go to the Fringe, like we've done, we use our time as efficiently as possible, and we tell the complete story in the 59 minutes that the runtime actually is. Unfortunately, that's not really a runtime that exists anywhere else in theater.
Except for TYA.
Except for TYA, and this is not
TYA being Theater for Young Audiences. That's an American term.
And this is not a young audience show. I mean, of course, it's not necessarily family unfriendly, but it's pretty family unfriendly. It depends on your parenting style, I guess.
Yeah, but we want to expand it to a 90-minute one act.
Correct.
And that's a much more traditional format for getting things on, isn't it?
Yes. Anywhere from 90 to 100, maybe even 110 minutes, but definitely as a one act, because as you've seen, it's one giant conversation. When I was writing the script, finding the scene breaks was actually a very weird thing, because there's not really any. There's certain parts where set stuff needs to get moved around a little bit, but it really does flow as one gigantic scene and one long conversation. As anyone who's seen the stage version of 12 Angry Men can attest, it just has to happen that way. Adding more material is a matter of just finding new aspects of the conversation to happen and
yes,
fleshing
the format
out.
helps you there, I think, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, that won't necessarily. It wouldn't be padding anyway, because you're both very intelligent writers, but it's harder to fall into the trap of padding, I suppose.
Yeah, and it does mean that it could probably never exist as a 2-act show, because there's not really any breakaway point where you'd want to step away for a while and let the audience sort of escape and then have to bring them back into the world.
Yeah, but that said, we already have a lot of things that we'd like to explore further in a 90-minute version, and with that, we're going to try to develop it more in the States. We both live in New York, so we're going to try to see where it goes. We have a lot of ideas for because Tess really only does sing that one song.
Yes.
And
she spends all the time reacting to what she's seeing, but she's not allowed to engage. So
yes.
it's a hard role, that, isn't it?
Yes, and we want to explore more material for her. We still want, in a traditional musical theater sense, usually the main character has a character establishment song or something that used to be called an I Want song, but we definitely didn't want to do that for her because
I want more heroin.
Yes,
right, yeah.
because we
a bit
really,
of a one-note thing.
We really like the idea of the fact that you learn about her through everybody else. But there is an opportunity for her to sing and get more into her head later in the show, which we want to expand on. There are more.
Yes. I agree with that. There's depths yet to be plumbed, I think.
There. And without being too prescriptive to potential audience members, our sort of personal interpretation of the show is this is really Tess's psyche fractalizing and then thinking and processing her life in her dying moments. And none of this is necessarily actually happening, but it means that every character is really Tess, and somehow finding a way to tie that in with Tess, the body, like on stage, and the actor playing Tess, and having it all be very clear that this is all one giant process moment for her.
It's her limbo, not the limbo of her jurors who, if you took it the other way, they've been called to some kind of celestial court, because that's the easiest thumbnail sketch for that, isn't it?
Sure.
Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Well, there we are. That was Casey Kendall and Jonathan Bowerfield, and we were talking about their show Limbo, The 12. It's running in alternation with Limbo City of Dreams, so if you can, try and see both of them. But if you wish to see The 12, it's on even dates until the 24th of August at the Patterhouse, and I'm not making fun of that, that's how it's spelt, Hoose, in Chamber Street at 3 o'clock. And as I say, it alternates on odd dates with City of Dreams until the 23rd, although not the 19th. And if you want to see the Conservatoire's Legally Blonde, you can do so at the Assembly Rooms in George Street in the New Town on all dates until the 24th, with the exception again of the 19th. And just so you know, I gave Limbo, The 12, 5 stars, and I called it exquisite and intricate. Well, on to another 5-star show, and it's the show we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical by Alexander S. Bermange. And I said it was immaculate, hilarious and unmistakable gem. So, in a minute, we'll hear an extract of that conversation I had with Alexander about his show, and in particular how he came up with these songs and ideas which he features throughout the show, which is a cabaret featuring 4 performers, looking at the trials, tribulations and experiences of musical theatre actors. And I'm extremely grateful to Alexander because he has allowed us to play a live recording of the cast singing the opening number to I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical. So in a second you're going to hear the very, very talented voices of Charlotte Ann Steen, Charlotte O'Rourke, James Hume and Felix Moss. And if you enjoyed the cleverness of the number you heard at the top of this episode, you're going to love this. Turn on your musical theatre antenna and try and pick up as many musical theatre references as you can in this, the opening number of I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical.
Then after about a Malteser or 3, at last the house lights go out, oh so gradually. A voice goes,
ladies and gents, blah blah blah, blah 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 blah.
There's yet more silent suspense, and then the opening part. Dates stint on the set, and soon you found the guy who's doing the sound has not quite mastered it yet. And the lyrics was also mean, no way to understand the cast. Well, those fingers will sound like the natives of Belfast.
And meanwhile, half the audience finish off the emails they've begun.
The others start unwrapping all their boiled sweeties one by one.
And looking towards the bit of stage, some killer hasn't looked from you.
Is it ideal to watch some giant's head that's right in front of you?
And latecomers come clambering through, not caring if they take an inch.
At least they're a distraction from the total wheels that's on the stage.
You'll
Love the opening number when set on walking like hell. Will they be signed by someone clearly blind?
It could be miming as well.
You'll wish you'd have checked Wikipedia for synopsis before you had gone, for then you might have a clue what the hell is going on. What's best in the opening number will be the big finish, no doubt. No matter if it is with their pause, for a few moments of pause, so while you're leaving them yours, but don't do that now.
However, it's interesting because it's very good of you to credit your sort of wider group of friends and contemporaries of giving you some examples. But actually, you have come up with many of the ideas and then said, what must it be like to kiss someone you don't like? So
Yes.
actually, it's not simply you've been panning for gold amongst your friends. You've been panning for gold based on an idea that you've had. So,
Completely.
So that's quite interesting to me. So you from your own observations and presumably in some cases not from life but just imagining what that must be like.
Yes.
You've had to define in many cases what it is you want to, what concept is behind it.
Completely.
Yeah.
I think that's coming about through my own curiosity, really. I mean, just as the passengers on the cruise that I described were curious in the lives of performers, I was curious. I mean, I know what it's like to watch an exhausting looking dance routine from the perspective of an audience member. I know what it's like, sitting behind a piano and watching them do it over and over again in rehearsals. But what it feels like, I didn't know. And in terms of the other embarrassing things that have happened, that was a lovely thing that I wanted to mine for in all of these examples, be it the dance routine or the kiss or whatever, just trying to dig for those truthful moments. What has happened to you in a dance routine, so that all these things do have their basis in things that have happened. And it's just my curiosity as much as anything. I sat down and I thought, okay, what would I like to know about the lives of musical theatre performers? Because I'm in the business, and we want the show to appeal to people in the business, but we also want it to appeal to lay people as well. So we don't want it to be full of in-jokes. It's very consciously not a parody. There are a lot of Easter eggs, as you will doubtless have noticed, for the discerning musical theatre aficionado, but we've deliberately constructed it in a way that nothing is designed to go over the heads of anyone who's not well versed in musicals. They'll just appreciate it, hopefully, on a different level.
Well, I bought a friend of mine who likes musicals at the basic level, and
Right.
he won't mind me saying that, but he
of
goes to
course.
theatre, he loves them, and then goes away again and goes back to accounting or
Yes.
the exciting things in his life. So he's not sort of as married to it as many of us are.
Yes.
And so, exactly as you say, I was enjoying it. There's a very brief reference to, as you say, other songs, bits and pieces. I mean, the old piano roll blues, which isn't even that well-known Sondheim song, because it's a cut song from Follies, isn't it? So, that was a lovely little flavour that came my way. It's like a raspberry ripple. There's just something extra in there.
Well, there are lots of nuggets. I'm a great believer when writing comedic material, and 90% of the show is comedic, in the music contributing to the humour as much as the lyrics. And also providing something whereby repeat listens and repeat views also proved rewarding. And we've been delighted by the number of people who've been in multiple times, even though they might have only a few nights in Edinburgh. We've had people who've been in more than once, just because they've sensed that there was something going on with some of the songs. So, for example, the opening number is called The Opening Number. It's all about what it's like for performers to do an opening number. It is an entirely original song, but the discerning audience member will pick up on the fact that virtually every line of music is a line from a different opening number of a different musical.
Yes, it's a Neapolitan ice cream in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely way of describing it.
I've
yes,
obviously got ice cream on the head.
That's
on
great.
the
I'm a
mind
great
today,
foodie, so go right ahead. And similar with A Step Too Far, which is the song about dance routines. Just because it's fun and playful, it rewards those who are in the know, but also it just helps give the feel. It gives the opening number the real feel of an opening number. It gives A Step Too Far the real feel of a dance routine.
An overdone one, yes.
Absolutely. So
well,
that's
that's
very
exactly
conscious.
what my friend, who, as I say, isn't that into it, he loved
Yes.
the show too.
Yes.
But he was probably connecting to some elements, and
Of
I was
course.
connecting to other elements.
Absolutely.
And I suspect that would be true of almost every audience member. If you sat down and chatted to them, they would all have different bits that they like best, just because of their own thresholds of musical theatre love, shall we say.
Completely. And I mean, what we try to do is create something that is the combination of all these different elements: the lyrics, the music, which are hopefully working on their different levels for different audience members, the staging, of which there's much to enjoy, even though it's a relatively small space and there are only four performers. But I think Chris Whittaker, our director choreographer, has done a tremendous job of making it visually exciting. And our four artists are, part of the reason why a lot of the musical Easter eggs might not be picked up is there's quite simply so much to enjoy and admire in the performances. We were blessed to find four
it's an amazing
performers
cast,
who are right at the top of their game. They've all been in numerous West End productions. They totally get the material. We're very, very lucky, and so just watching them, regardless of the material they're performing, I think is just a great thing in itself.
Musical talk. Alexander Beaumange there, in a brief extract of a conversation I had with him, talking about I wish my life were like a musical. All those references to Easter eggs and ice cream make it sound like a confection. And so it was, but it was a confection with a very solid base, like a key lime pie. It would make a perfect end to your day in Edinburgh, because it's on at 8:45 every day for 1 hour at the Underbelly in Bristow Square, in what used to be called Med Quad. And it's on every day until the 26th of August, a show I definitely recommend. Well, time to look at a trio of shows now, I think. You may remember that in the past I've had the pleasure of talking about two shows I particularly liked. They're called, and these are some of the best names in musical theatre, Vampire Hospital Waiting Room and Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair. And my heart jumped for joy this year when I noticed that they were both coming back to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe with their original casts. In 2016 I was able to meet with Theo McCabe and Craig Methan, the people who had written Vampire Hospital Waiting Room, to talk about that show and the second show which Theo had been involved in writing, Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair. Well, on this occasion, in 2019 for the revivals, I sat down again with Theo, but also Joe McArdle, an actor I've admired for many years, who is as charming off stage as he is hilarious on. And not only are they doing the two shows in succession, Theo and Joe are also doing a stand-up act called Joe McArdle is Theo McCabe. Details of all three of those shows after this song and extract of that interview with Theo McCabe and the wonderful Joe McArdle.
Apocalypse cruise ship love affair. Powder your nose and quaff your hair. For the doomsday moon prepare. Apocalypse cruise
I'm your host, Hank Leroy's. Welcome to Blues Cruise.
Apocalypse cruise ship, love affair. Taste heaven before you get there. Watch the world explode from your deck chair. As you're consumed by fire, you'll be glad you dipped into our pool. But sad the man above us is so rough and cruel. And with your final breath, you'll say, what fun I had on holiday. Apocalypse cruise ship, love affair. No lifeboats nor a de-stress flare. We're all fucked, so enjoy the sea air. As your eyes and skin melt off, feel thankful for the mini-golf. But still annoyed the man above, so cruel and rough. And with your final breath, you'll say, what fun I had on holiday.
Who's ready for a key change? We've got cocktail bars, we got healthy lifestyle seminars, we got laser tag, cinemas and bowling. We've got singles night and free profiling ticks. We got plays and acrobatics. We got comedy and magics. So if you need something to do, it's all right here for you. On a blues cruise, you never lose and you're never feeling blue. Apocalypse cruise ship, love affair. Prepare for your final prayer as you ascend up heaven's stair. Or go down to Lucifer. Apocalypse cruise ship, love affair. Fuck yeah!
And it's a question for the two of you. Is there a song or a scene that you particularly like over all others?
Do you have one for you?
And why, by the way? That's the bit that's really interesting, I think.
I'd say from the two shows, Vampire is Dr. Bloom's improvised section, where he plays with Artie, and it's such a silly bit, but you've built up the character there, and you know we've got such a funny character there, and we just let Joe go wild, and he does such a good job of like bringing new stuff to it, and he makes us laugh every time. And I think that is the element, that is the essence of Vampire After Waiting Room, is that it's madness and that you're under the control of Dr. Bloom, and to let him have that time where it's literally just him and the audience and he's in control is so fun. From Apocalypse, I think it's 6 Inches of Face, which is because I think if we had to pick a favourite thing from each show, it's for me it's like Dr. Bloom's story in Vampire, and then for Apocalypse it's maybe more the music and stuff, because we put more effort into that and we had longer to write it. And I think 6 Inches of Face is such a fun song, and the scenes work so well, and there's laughs all the way through the song. So those are my two favourite bits from the two different shows, probably.
Same question to number 2, please.
I'd say like I've always loved I love the song, but just how clever the Fun in Funeral vibe is, like all the puns in that I just always loved. But my favourite song in Apocalypse is actually Martin's Deranged Doo-Wopper. I always get the name wrong, but I love that song so much. And in Apocalypse, maybe the same, like 6 Inches of Face. That's the one I'm not in, but I'm always at the side, like really rocking out, wishing I was in that song because it's so catchy. But
one day with your gun, you can be.
That's it. I come in anyway, force myself into that scene like I do in most scenes. But I also, it was never in the original in Vampire, but when Theo added the reprise to Dr. Bloom's, like, It's My First Time reprise, I love singing that one. That's my favourite one to sing, I'd say, out of both shows.
Yeah, it's like the emotional moment for Dr. Bloom.
Yeah, where he becomes a vampire. Like, it used to just be that he just becomes a vampire like that, you know. But now he has this, like, actually quite a soft song.
Yeah, well, it's a apotheosis song in a way.
Yeah.
His journey is complete in a way.
Exactly.
Really.
It's just nice. It just sounds like.
So, how can people see these shows in Edinburgh?
Go on, Theo.
Yeah. Roll up.
Patter House at 2:15 every day, and then we have double shows on the weekend, so we do an extra show on 11:30 a.m.
That's in sequence, isn't it? You can see both shows, one on
You
one
can see
day.
both shows on
Yeah.
a weekend, or you can see alternating dates throughout the festival on the weekdays.
And presumably, once Edinburgh's over, we can see you in the new musical Real Hospital Waiting Room as you wait for your recovery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'll all be in there. It's funny, yeah. Like we had a couple of these older ladies that came. They did the double.
Yeah.
They watched
Oh, did
Vampire,
they?
then Apocalypse, and then they came to Vampire again on the Sunday. So they had a double Vampire and a dose of Apocalypse in between. So like that kind of encapsulates it all.
And isn't it flattering that it actually does appeal to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you might think, oh, it's a youth thing, but it isn't. It's a
really
universal
not.
thing.
Yeah, it
I've
really
actually
is.
often found older crowds love it more.
Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I'd say it's like students love it. Everyone loves it. So it's
Yeah, and I've done lots of things where it's a bit student-y and it's really playing up to a young crowd. But with these shows, it's so universal. And
Yeah.
It's just like. I don't know where our audience comes from, but they're
couldn't
great and they
pinpoint
keep
it.
coming back.
You know where they're going, though.
Yeah.
And finally, how can people see your stand-up?
That's every day at 5 o'clock at South East Southside. It's a nice little pub near Buccleuch Street, on Buccleuch Street, I should say, and it's free. So it's
The pub isn't, but the show
pub's
is.
not free, but the show's free. Yeah,
And it's well worth seeing too.
It's
I
worth
think.
seeing, yeah, every day. Every day it's on. So.
Well, Theo, Joe, it's a real pleasure to talk to you both. It has been absolutely fantastic, actually, to get your further insights into the shows that you do, and to just learn a little bit more about you both. But I wish you great success with the rest of your Edinburgh run, for everything else you do. And forgive me, I'm not going to let you go, so I'll carry on seeing you and in pretty much everything you do.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks for your support.
Idiots. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. There we are. That was Joe McArdle and Theo McCabe talking about Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair and Vampire Hospital Waiting Room. Both shows are running in rotation at 2:15 at the Patterhouse in Chamber Street. And if you want to see them both in a double bill, you can do so at weekends. And if you think that must be tiring, you can also go and see Joe and Theo doing their stand-up act at Sophie's Southside, which is on at 5 o'clock every evening. Both their musicals are 5-star musicals. For Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair, I called it hilarious and must-see. And for Vampire Hospital Waiting Room, I said, a true cult classic, the best there is. And there's no word of a lie in either of those reviews. So, from one type of absurdist musical theatre to perhaps another. I'm talking about a show called Unexpected Item in the Bagging Area. Great title, interesting show. So in a minute we'll hear from its composer, Lawrence T. Stannard, who I interviewed about a previous show in Edinburgh a few years ago, to talk about this, his 2019 offering. But before that, let's hear a song from the new show called Fish Cakes. And it's sung by a supermarket fishmonger who's desperately in love with a supermarket baker.
I sit here every day, surrounded by my fish. In my world of scaly grey, I only have one wish: to be seen by that girl among her cinnamon whirls. Her skin is soft like dough balls, and my love, it starts to snowball. But she never looks at my display. It's a truth I can't forget. 18 hours are in our way, and cod doesn't sit well with baguette. She makes my heart self-rising, and my grease is not appetizing. I'm in such turmoil, covered in fish oil. It seeps through my hairnet. When she smiles, I start to sweat. And that's not the only thing that's wet. Maybe my heart will break, but you and me can make fish cake. I wanna put 'em in the oven and bake. God, that's me loving. She will bring the batter my heart self-rising, and I find her mesmerizing. The cookie mixture overflows, my love for her just grows and grows. The girl makes me so dizzy, and the baking soda's fizzy. I can't hide anymore, I want everyone to see that the girl I love is me. Maybe my heart will break. I love myself, but you and me can make. I love myself. I wanna put them in the oven. I bake up that sweet love. I love. She will bring them back. I love the hate. Yeah, I wanna make fish cake. Yeah, I wanna make. I love myself. I wanna make myself. Clean up in aisle 4.
What songs cause you the greatest difficulty? And of course the follow-up question to that is, and why?
So, when writing this show, I wanted so strongly it to be a musical, it to be quirky, it maybe not particularly to fit into a category other than that. It's definitely not a plot-driven musical. You're not going to walk away crying. And that's so fun, and that's what we were aiming for. So it's almost distressing when people don't get the show. They say, "Oh, what's happened? What's changed? Why are we watching the show?"
But really, it's fun.
Yes,
so.
and that's the point. It's all about character, and it's just about it's a comment on supermarkets and life being a bit pointless and nothing. It's very fun. So therefore, songs like "Quiz Her," which is the opening number to the fundraiser scene, is basically just a fun song about a quiz that's quite funny in places, and also it's just like a bit of a bop, and it sounds quite. It functions as a song, and there's so many places in musicals where a song is just a song, and especially in Edinburgh when you have an hour, giving a 4-minute song the only purpose is to entertain as a song is scary. So that's writing that and going, oh, the plot. Not that there's much plot to be advanced anyway, but we're definitely not advancing the plot here. We're literally just.
This is a breath of comedy.
Yeah. So things like that are confusing, but once we kind of really defined what our show was, suddenly it has space for that because it's entertaining and we want to hear the characters sing well, but and that kind of thing.
But it also adds colour, isn't it? So it's not treading water. It's still helping to develop the characters, and of course it also has. I mean, and this is the great thing that music allows. That concertinaing of time, because actually if it had been turned into a quiz show sketch, and much less a song, then actually it would probably be 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And actually, so you whiz us through a moment of joy in a way that's seamless and works very effectively in taking us towards the denouement, because it's towards that end of the piece, isn't it? So has it changed much over its development period, either in terms of narrative arc or as in score?
So
how many babies have you killed? By which I mean your work.
Yeah. I've only killed one big baby, actually. And
a lovely sentence that is, by the way.
Yeah, and then one other reprise of a baby, which is kind of a nephew or something. It's fine. So we started writing. We kind of had a rough script by April, and we were writing songs, and the first 4 songs or so were written, and we're feeling good about it. And again, trying to find what the show was and why it had no plot. So there was a plot at the end that the supermarket was going to be saved, and it was fine. And then we thought, well, there's no need to particularly end. We're commenting on just general life and how funny it is when people just sit next to each other all day, every day, and
the diurnal round.
Yeah. So why does it need to end that way? And up until very recently, details of the plot, as in how it finished up at the end, were changing. Another of my favourite numbers, Lucky Dip, at the end, was basically just saying, take what you're given, enjoy your life, because life's a lucky dip. You just get what you're given, and that's fine. I said Avenue Q earlier, and I think we took a lot of inspiration from that idea of you end a show and you think, oh gosh, loads has happened, but actually, perspective, not much has happened. Let's just grin and keep going, because why not?
It's incident, isn't it, without necessarily a lot of meaning.
Exactly. So in that way, the final bit of the plot has changed tons, because we weren't quite sure how to frame it. Equally, after the final number, we could have put an extra scene on the end to tie things up a bit.
Coda.
And we're never really sure, would that be fun? If the people are really invested, it's just another funny. Equally, we're so pushed for time at the Fringe and that kind of thing. So it's so hard to judge where an audience will be with the characters. Are they happy that, like, yeah, nothing's really changed? Maybe you've got fired, but then you might not be, you know. Yeah. And it's the plot has changed lots, and the songs are kind of altered around that. The reprise is more the opening 5 songs of Bag for Life, Fish Cakes, Unexpected, Fundraiser, and Quizzer, and then at the end, Lucky Dip. They're the kind of framework, and then the reprises have changed massively, because essentially that's where the plot happens.
Yeah. Yes, and they give resonance, don't they, rather than you're not introducing new material, you're just re-emphasising or re-amplifying something that's occurred again.
So I think we kind of introduce the characters, and then we go, so what actually happens? And then, that's...
Musical talk. There we are, Lawrence T. Stannard talking about unexpected item in the bagging area. And that can be seen at the Underbelly in Cowgate from 3:45 every afternoon until the 25th of August. Well, if that show feels terribly, terribly contemporary, and it is, let's roll back the clock to 1698 as we learn more about David William Hughes's latest show. He's back in Edinburgh again this year with Elizabethan, which was his wonderful show about Renaissance music last year, but he's also doing a second cabaret-style show called Wit and Mirth, which combines songs collected by Thomas Durfey in 1698 as a cure for melancholia, and contemporary cabaret numbers inspired or thematically linked to those Thomas Durfey collected songs. So, a little bit of then and a little bit of now. And in a minute we'll be hearing one of those slightly rude contemporary cabaret numbers by David himself, which is very much in keeping with the tone and style of the late 17th century in terms of its rumbustious musical style. But before that, let's hear a short extract of a conversation I had with David about this new show, Wit and Mirth. Musical talk. But Elizabethan is not your only show.
That's right, yes.
You also have Wit and Mirth, which
That's
I had
right.
the pleasure of seeing the other day and adored. I thought it was fantastic. So would you care to briefly explain what the unique selling points of Wit and Mirth are?
So Wit
Presumably
and-
there's two. There's both Mirth and Wit. But
Well,
let's expand upon that.
Wit and Mirth is actually the title of a book which is 300 years old by a man called Thomas Durfey, and in its time it was one of England's biggest selling publications and was a smash hit and sold out multiple editions and eventually ran to 6 volumes, and it's basically a collection of funny songs and stories and little excerpts from plays and speeches and things, kind of all-purpose entertainment book. And so the show is some of those songs and some of my own songs inspired by them.
So, well, let's divide it in two, because I tell you what I thought was so lovely about it was that you have a great rapport with your audience. I saw that in Elizabethan, but it really comes to the fore here because it is singularly you and a keyboard keeping us, the punters, entertained.
It's more like a stand-up show in a way than a play. So,
Oh yes, there's no narrative in that sense, is
No.
there? No. And you wouldn't think necessarily that sort of 21st century comic songs and 300, 400-year-old sort of... Because it's a collection, isn't it? They're not all by Thomas
They're
Durfey.
not all by him, and he also makes claim to have written some that he probably didn't.
Yes.
So
this one's good. It's got my name on it.
Yes.
But what I like is the fact that you're able to balance one with the other. You wouldn't necessarily think that those two periods would mesh as well as they do, and I think you're very good at finding golden threads and connections. So actually, although it's very clear that when you sing the older songs, they are older songs, you know, they have that sense about them, they're still accessible, and you've connected them with your sort of ongoing patter and your own lyrics. So was that difficult? I mean, had you written your comic songs before you decided on this show? So was it finding matches and pairs? Or did you think, actually, no, what would be a really good connection from this song to this song would be my new song here?
So there were a couple of my songs that existed previously, but most of them I tried to sort of write new songs on themes that I found in the Thomas Durfey songs. So that's kind of the loosely paired, one historical song and one modern song. And then what I've tried to do as well is with the historical songs perform them in quite a modern way, so with a piano, and trying to stylistically make them similar to what's happening nowadays since then.
Did you find that easier to do? Because I remember when we were talking about Elizabethan, you were saying the great thing about Renaissance music is it's beautiful and wonderful, but you do sort of need to understand the way that music worked in those days to get it. There's a sort of there's an extra step away from it, which you have to bridge, and then once you're in, it's lovely. Do you find it was easy? You know, these are 100, 200 years later.
I think,
was that easier?
Yes. So I think, historically speaking, 100 years after the Elizabethan period, you know, beginning of the 18th century, we're now in kind of the same musical language that we're still using today. So that makes it easier. I mean, it's basically, most of the songs are chords and a tune like you would have nowadays. Yes. The other part of it as well is that the Thomas D'Urfey songs are less artistic and less complicated simply. His songs are really more about an amusing poem, and rather than trying to be melodically complicated. And I think, you know, as a book, it's really written for people to sit around and sing them all together and have a laugh. It's not so artistic, perhaps.
Well, they're not parlour songs in the Victorian sense, are they? No, they're not quite rugby songs either, but they are perhaps closer to rugby than they are to parlour.
I think they're probably... There's a mixture, but I imagine them being sung in bars or round the fireplace after a few beers or something like that.
Particularly rowdy evening in a coffee house.
Perhaps, yes.
I say rowdy, actually that's very unfair, because the songs, I really enjoyed the songs. I mean, would you care to identify one or two of the ones that you picked, and perhaps one or two that you would like to have done but were just a step away or too far? Or because I remember we had a slightly off the record chat, and you were saying that you had to distill it down to what you thought would work.
Yes. So there is one of my favourite songs in the show is one called The Fart, which is set at the royal court, and in the song basically someone farts and then they go around the room trying to find out who did it, and of course they don't find out, and then they blame it on the dog. And that's great, because in the actual book there's this chorus that comes back after every verse of fart noises, which is just kind of unexpected and stupid and funny. And
hard to expect to see in a book, really.
Yeah, it's that's quite amusing. And there's one about a boy who dies by trying to eat a custard too quickly, and those are quite fun ones. There's one I haven't got in there is there's a nice one about a beard and how it sort of riffs on all the different ridiculous beard styles that people had, and I thought that might work because, you know, beards are pretty fashionable at the moment.
Very topical, I'd say. Yes, quite.
But some of what you get with some of the problems is just things that would have been an everyday reference 300 years ago, no one knows about now. So sometimes that means you can't do a song, but sometimes, like in the fart song, I've just adjusted a few words here and there to make it more understandable.
To bridge that gap of disconnect, because it's always possible, isn't it? Age does this all the time. You know, history just rolls on and on, as you'd expect, and therefore, you know, the most popular song of 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago is either forgotten or will contain elements, you know. Gilbert and Sullivan is now getting on. Some of their stuff's 150 years old, which I find staggering, or certainly in that region. Most of that stuff is still quite understandable, but there are references, you know, I'll pick one out immediately. In Iolanthe, there is a whole song about Captain Shaw, and that's a reference to a very famous fireman of the Victorian era who became a great celebrity. Doesn't mean much now.
No.
And so you sort of have to know that, or at least get from the plot that he was famous, even if you don't know who he was. And that's only 150 years. We're talking 300 here.
Yeah.
And so, you know, apart from everyone would have heard of Queen Anne or George I or whoever. I'm talking about, you know, the celebrities of the day, and haven't lingered.
No, and I think that's marks the difference really between the songs that work and the songs that don't.
I wanted to answer you swiftly, to tell you the what, when and why. The tone of your writing was over-exciting, and it seemed a shame not to reply. I'm right-handed but type with my left hand when I'm otherwise occupied. I needed to go, but words started to flow as I'm buttoning down my fly. Your email, dear boss, looked important, and I wanted to write you back quick, to show I'm no shirker, but rather a worker who'd honour your arse with a lick. And though I stand here in the bathroom, I know an excellent trick. I'm holding my phone in my left hand alone, in my right I am holding my prick. As I start to write, it goes smoothly. My grammar is never amiss. My turns of phrase elegant, I am quite eloquent. To read what I write must be bliss. But tragedy strikes at the sign-off when sending that final best wish. As my phone, it is final, falls in the urinal and is soaked in my very own piss.
David certainly knows how to connect with a room, and on the night I went, he was wonderful. So, if you want to go and see Wit and Mirth, you can. It's a late night offering at 10:15 every evening at Bar 50, just off Cowgate, and that's running until the 23rd of August, with the exception of the 18th. And it's the same dates for Elizabethan, his earlier show, in both senses, which you can see at the Space at Surgeons Hall at 6:05 every night on the same dates. Well, we're very nearly at the end of this episode, and I do hope you've enjoyed the variety of songs and interviews which I've offered up to give you just a sense of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe and its musical offerings this year. There's still plenty more on the bone, many, many more shows that you can see, shows which I didn't get to see, which may be brilliant, and I should be sad I've missed. But you just can't do everything. The wonderful thing about the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is you can make it your own. You can plan it, as I do, and work out what shows you're going to see in advance, or you can just turn up and see how your fancy takes you. But I do hope that if you do get a chance to go this year, and I strongly recommend it to everyone, that you think about some of the shows I've mentioned today. They're all great in very different ways. But I have left my favourite till the very end. And of course that makes it the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe for 2019. What is the show, you ask? Well, you're very right to ask, and I'm very right to give you an answer. The answer is You and I, a new musical by the people behind Buried, the very wonderful musical from a few years ago. That's Cordelia O'Driscoll and Tom Williams. You and I is absolutely a 5-star show, twinkling, clever, funny and touching. I genuinely loved it, and I hope to see it again once the Fringe has finished. And I hope that you get a chance to see it whilst it's still on at the Fringe. It's running until the 26th of August at the Underbelly in Bristow Square at 5:10 every day. And in a minute we'll hear a short extract of a conversation I had with the lovely Cordelia and Tom about their brand new show, You and I. And then that will bring this episode to an end. But not before we've heard one more song. It's fittingly called Final Goodbyes, First Hellos, and it's another song from the Book of Names, which was one of the shows you could have seen last year, and written by Jonathan Bowerfield and Casey Kendall. So, for the time being, I'm going to say goodbye, but not before you've had a chance to hear Cordelia O'Driscoll and Tom Williams talking about You and I, and that final song from the Book of Names. And don't forget there'll be extensive coverage of this year's Festival Fringe in the next few weeks and months here on Musical Talk. So, enjoy. Musical Talk. But let us talk about your new show, which I enjoyed immensely. You and I, would one or either or both of you, that's always interesting, try and have a crack at a spoiler-free description of the story?
You can do that. I'm rubbish at that.
Yeah, so You and I is our new musical, and it's about a girl called Fran who...
Fran,
yeah. Who, I suppose she leads quite an isolated, secluded life. She sort of suffers from anxiety and then ends up one day having a robot delivered to her door. And I think that's spoiler free because that is very much the selling point of the show. But
yeah.
And when they got together, it was much that's a totally different story.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sort of just an adventure of her teaching the robot what it is to be a human and sort of get on in the world and sort of learning things back from the robot from his new perspective. And I suppose that's probably all we can say. Actually,
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, it's about regaining identity and then gaining identity in terms of the robot and her relationship. And it's really fun. It's quite silly, but it's also quite sad at points.
Oh, it's certainly touching. I think that's very clear. And in one or two very unexpected areas. I mean, you do pull off. I don't think I can say. I don't think I'm ruining anything when I say that. One is drawn very much to the personality of Robert the robot, and obviously he has a journey. I'm using he. And Fran has a journey, and various people in the it's their journey between the two of them, isn't it? And they do. It's exactly that kind of thing of she's, as you said, she's isolated and self-isolated in a sense. So she's when I say dehumanise, that's a terribly strong word, but she has withdrawn. And therefore she's not outside of humanity, but she's very much on the fringes and not engaging. And of course he isn't of humanity, but of course made to look like humanity, which is a terrifying thing in some senses, and indeed a recognised terrifying thing in some cases. And of course he also is able to draw from her. So it's drawing the humanity from the inhuman, but not necessarily the inhumane, I suppose. That's that seems to be the balance, the tightrope you're walking. And I think you tackle it tremendously successfully. Also, and it has that same, to a degree, tonal feel of your previous show, and I think it's the fusion of your words and your music together actually make that work very well. But it's got that. It has the potential to be terribly earnest, that kind of let's all mutually learn. But I can assure you, I don't have to assure you, I'm assuring everyone else, but it absolutely isn't, because you have that liberal dose of not just the funny, but if I may say, there's the sense, it's like you stir in a big old spoon of absurd and then let the sincerity flow from that. And that sounds like that oughtn't to work in some senses, but that is exactly what happens, I think. It's ultimately, if you think about it, sort of, at this stage of human development, a very ridiculous thing. You couldn't actually accept it happening. And then the moment you accept it happening, this is a fantastically humane story. I keep coming back to the word humane, but I like it because that covers everything from emotional journeys and emotional responses to intellectual journeys and intellectual responses, and also that slightly greater thing that we are or aren't, depending on who we are. Well, that's a terrible sentence, isn't it? But, that ineffable humanness. Gosh, I am talking trite this morning. So, how did you approach it? I mean, when did you realise there was going to be a second show? That your performance, your professional relationship as creators was so successful. I'm so delighted you've done it, but there must have been a moment like, oh, come on then, let's do another.
I think it was actually probably like around Christmas time.
This last year?
Because I think Colla Theatre,
your company,
wanted to go to Fringe and take something again, and I think we'd spoken about this idea. I actually can't remember when or how in depth, but I think that was when we were like, okay, we'll commit to this. So then we wrote it between, I don't know, like February and now, really.
Pretty much, up to the wire.
It was quite time pressured, not gonna lie, because we
go to New York.
We go to New York, and me and Tom were like self-producing it. Trying to raise all that money was an absolute nightmare.
That was tough.
So doing that all at once was insane, really. But we were slightly too optimistic. I mean, it all worked out. But
it all worked out. We've learned a lot. But I kind of always knew that I wanted to do another one. We just didn't know what it was going to be. But ever since Buried happened, I was like, we must try something new. That was great. But
I just like, you said something there a minute ago, Cordelia, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and one of the things which is almost never mentioned in terms of actually manifesting creative ideas into something. You said commitment. Obviously people throw the word commitment around quite often, to the point where it's often sort of a throwaway, oh, I've got great commitment to this project or whatever, but actually you're quite right, you have to commit to a project to make it work. It's building your foundation stones. It just reminded me of something that happened to me 20 years ago when I was putting on a pantomime. It was a very, very much lower level thing than you. But I remember the person I was writing with said to me, I'm committing to this project, and that's when I knew that it was on, because in a sense this fellow had sort of bolted himself to the as the runaway mule, or however you would like to describe what your creative process is. But when I thought, oh well, that's very interesting, and you've just used it there as the very first thing, but really was you committed to the project. So you had these ideas, but somehow you said, right, we'll do it. And then it's like things don't happen unless you put them in a diary. Socially, it's odd, isn't it? You have to sort of, it's the commitment that makes them happen.
Absolutely.
Dawn came, and with it the first ferry from the shore.
Everyone had rushed to assemble their luggage before first light, so we were all lined up on the shore, watching it come in.
After all the noise, no one wanted to break the quiet, just the gentle lapping of the waves.
Light started creeping up. We could see silhouettes on the boat.
Word spread that the ferry was carrying anyone that was waiting on shore to meet us. They were coming to us.
A sense of calm swept over us. A sort of charged calm like a taut guitar string waiting to be played.
There's something about the dawn, the softness of the light,
the promise of the day to come as it chases off the night.
The old world fades away, and all that's left is you. And suddenly you're standing there on the edge,
on the edge of something.
There's a building on an island in a bay, with a book full of names from a bygone day. And though they are gone, their names will live on in a building on an island in a bay.
This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2019, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with the original creators in each case. And my thanks to each and every one of them for allowing me to play their songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. And what was it really like at the Edinburgh Fringe this year? It was like this.